And welcome back, scholars, to another e-learning lesson video. This is another Q2 enrichment lesson over analyzing stylistic devices. So, in addition to the way that a writer presents their ideas, the language that a writer uses can also be important to analyze. When we talk about style in rhetoric, what we're generally referring to is just the language or the different ways in which the writer uses special language to communicate their ideas. It's what Aristotle called ornamentation. See, writers will often draw upon various stylistic features of their language and various stylistic devices to ornament or enhance the persuasive techniques that they use. For instance, Abigail Adams refers to the British oppression of the American colonies as, quote, the scourges of the Almighty, and calls them calamities. And she does that, she uses those specific words and phrases to further kind of fan the flames of her son's indignation, to make him feel indignant toward what the British have done to his people. Another example, Benjamin Banneker uses repeated parallel phrases in paragraph 3, that you should at the same time do this, that you should at the same time do that, to emphasize the hypocritical nature of Jefferson's past actions toward his slaves. And by repeating that phrase, that you should at the same time, that's just hammering home the part of the actions that make it hypocritical, because that's what hypocrisy is doing something that or saying something rather, and then at the same time doing the opposite. Another example, in this most recent essay that we studied, most recent speech, Rice uses conjunctions between each area that she lists that people mistakenly believe don't aspire to democracy. She says, quote, Asia and Africa and Latin America and Eastern Europe and Russia. That's completely syntactically unnecessary. We just need the one and between the last two items. But she overuses the conjunctions there to suggest that there are many of these places, the massive scope of this particular problem, this form of prejudice. So, how do I analyze stylistic elements in my rhetorical analysis? Well, the biggest principle to keep in mind here is that stylistic elements enhance other persuasive techniques. You see, language at its heart is just packaging for ideas. Language itself cannot argue an idea. Language itself cannot persuade. So you need to look for ways in which elements of style can emphasize certain ideas that are being argued or defined or communicated throughout the passage. Look for ways in which elements can suggest other ideas, other images, other emotions. Look for ways in which elements of style can clarify certain ideas that the author is trying to get across. And then finally, look for ways in which elements of style can simply make the presentation of ideas sound pleasing to an audience. All right, let's take a look at a sample prompt to help us look at this concept this week. This is Florence Kelly's speech on child labor from the 2011 AP exam. All right. Here's an example of a stylistic technique, stylistic device that Kelly uses. 3 different times throughout her speech, she uses the phrase "tonight while we sleep" to talk about the children working in mills and factories. Tonight while we sleep, several thousand little girls will be working in textile mills. And then later on, and while we sleep, little white girls will be working tonight in the mills later on, and they will do so tonight while we sleep. So this is just some repetition here. It's a stylistic technique, and it's used to emphasize the repeated phrase. That's all repetition is when you repeat something, it sticks out more, thus it is emphasized. So what is she emphasizing here? Well, she's stressing this concept that the audience sort of has this luxury of sleeping while the children are doing all this work. And you know what it's trying to do. It's strengthening that appeal to guilt and shame, right? By noting it over and over again, it's just hitting them with shame after shame after shame. And so that's what the repetition does here. It enhances or emphasizes that appeal to shame. Another example from that same text is when she notes this in lines 75 through 77. They, the children that is, they carry bundles of garments from the factories to the tenements, little beasts of burden, robbed of school life that they may work for us. It's a really cool bit of figurative language here. Specifically, it's a metaphor referring to the children as little beasts of burden. And by doing so, she's not only like arguing that these children are doing this hard labor, but by calling them beasts of burden, she's suggesting that they have the same qualities as beasts of burden, like horses, oxen, etc., that sort of thing. Which implies that the children are really used more like tools and not treated like people. They're treated more like animals than anything else. Yeah, you can see here that it's not only strengthening her argument that child laborers are treated unfairly, because clearly we shouldn't treat people like animals, and it's also strengthening her pathos appeal, her appeal to pity, making the children seem all that more sympathetic. Let's take a look at one final example. This is from the very end of the speech. For the sake of the children, for the republic in which these children will vote after we are dead, and for the sake of our cause, we should enlist the working men voters with us in this task of freeing the children from toil. What I want you to note there is the repeated structure. For this, and for this. We call that parallel construction. It's a parallelism with a bit of repetition, but since it's not really so interesting, the fact that she's repeating for that's not terribly interesting. It's the fact that the structure is repeated. That's what's interesting here. What it does is it adds clarity, because when you repeat the same type of phrase over and over again, and you repeat the same word at the start of those phrases, it creates sort of like bullet points for each idea. We can see where each idea kind of starts and stops because it's headed by that same word and it's built in that same structure. For this, and for this. And so it adds clarity. It makes the meaning clearer. So in all, the clarity strengthens her argument by highlighting each individual reason why she wants her audience to go along with her. Clearly for this, for the children, for the republic, and for the sake of our cause, which is suffrage. Sorry, I blanked there for a second. Let's look at, we have one more to look at here. I wanted to add one more thing. This is something that she notes in lines 66 through 69. The children make our shoes in the shoe factories. They knit our stockings, our knitted underwear in the knitting factories. They spin and weave our cotton underwear in the cotton mills. Once again, we have a little bit of parallelism there. Just like the last example, you hear each of those back-to-back clauses are structured the exact same way, with the blank do this in the this, the blank do this in the this. And so that parallelism is really cool. In addition to kind of adding clarity, this kind of parallelism can also create a pleasing rhythm. Yeah, repetition can create a cool rhythm to text when it's read out loud. And patterns in language, just like patterns in music, are really pleasing to the human mind. We crave patterns. And so when we hear them, it makes our brains more engaged. So here you might say that the parallel structure is designed not only to add clarity to her argument by heaping these examples on, but it also is designed to capture the audience's attention through this pleasing rhythmic pattern, something like that. All right, so when you look for stylistic elements, it's a good idea to break up your search into 3 categories. Look for elements that deal with word choice, elements of style that deal with word arrangement, and lastly, elements that deal with word sound. When we're talking about word choice, it's exactly what it sounds like. You're looking at stylistic elements where the specific wording or phrasing used to communicate that idea has some further meaning. Elements like connotation of a word, or diction, which is a term used to describe the overall qualities of language used in a text or a part of a text. Things like imagery or various uses of figurative language. Those are all elements of word choice that you can look for and talk about in your analysis. And when you look for elements of word choice, you want to focus on what the chosen word or chosen phrase suggests or implies about the thing being talked about. Because usually with elements of word choice, it might be enhancing the literal, but it also might be enhancing what else we're supposed to take away from that word. What else does it suggest beyond literally what the writer is saying? Another element, word arrangement. That's exactly what it sounds like. The syntactic ordering or structuring of ideas, the way a sentence is constructed or a phrase is constructed. You want to look for elements like repetition, parallel or chiastic structure, the way modifiers are positioned in a particular sentence. And when you look at elements of word arrangement, you want to focus on how the arrangement of words or sentence structure emphasizes or draws attention to certain ideas. If it's repeated, then it's drawing attention to those repeated ideas. We tend to be more focused on things that come at the end of a sentence than at the beginning of the sentence. So look at ways that sentences are maybe arranged to emphasize ideas by intentionally putting them at the end, that sort of thing. Lastly, we come to word sound. I'm talking about the phonetic sounds that words make when spoken aloud. These are, look for elements like assonance and consonants of a word, alliteration, rhyme, also phonetic intensives, which is the study in linguistics of how certain vowel and consonant sounds are associated with certain ideas and feelings and that sort of thing. That's starting to get into some heavy linguistic stuff, but it's important in rhetoric as well. And when you look at elements of word sound, you're focusing on how the consonant and vowel sounds are affecting the ideas that are being talked about. And this honestly should really only be looked at, word sound should only be looked at when the language is highly poetic. In just everyday prose, word sound is not really, writers don't generally take into account word sound very often. So, but if you get a particular passage that uses a lot of poetic language, then word sound could be something to analyze. All right, so keep in mind that you probably already know some stylistic devices. You don't need to go out and memorize a whole bunch of new ones. Things like metaphor, simile, personification, parallelism, repetition. Those are all basic devices that you guys already know about. Other things like imagery, diction, word connotation, you already know about them. They're not technically devices, but they're still stylistic elements that are fair game to analyze. There are, of course, dozens more stylistic devices with those Greek and Latin names like anadiplosis, synesthesia, hypozeuxis. There's all kinds of elements like that. But you don't need to go out of your way to memorize a long catalog of these terms. It's just not essential that you know them. In fact, I've often found kind of an inverse correlation between students on the exams that I read from all over the world. Those students who have the high terminology vocabulary with the stylistic devices, it's kind of an inverse relationship with score. They know all these terms, but a lot of times, something like hypozeuxis is not a very interesting device. It doesn't really add a whole lot, and so students know that and they feel like they have to mention it, but then they don't have anything to say about it. So you only want to talk about style when it's clearly enhancing some idea, some image, or some feeling. That's all I have for you on this video, scholars. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll see you when I see you.